Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. How quickly we forget. At the turn of the century, a factory in Vermont was manufacturing one of the most innovative technologies of its day. It's a history nearly forgotten that obsessed today's guest for nearly 30 years. Autochrome color photography was invented by French cinematic pioneers, the Lumiere brothers, and they built their North American state-of-the-art factory in Burlington in 1901. To tell us more is Hugo Martinez-Cazon. He is the author of an article recently published in the Vermont Historical Society's History Journal. Welcome, Hugo.
Good afternoon. Hi, Fran.
So, by trade, you're an environmental engineer for the state of Vermont. Tell us briefly how your work early in your career led to this adventure into history.
Sure. I worked for most of my career as a hazardous waste engineer, and that involves figuring out what industries there were and trying to figure that out for another project. I came across a map that showed the factory in a remote part of the early days of Burlington in the 1900s. And it didn't show it specifically in an actual street address. So it took some figuring out where that might be, and it wasn't straightforward. But because of my work, that's how I began to find the building.
And you saw that maybe it was the Lumiere brothers and something that the Lumieres, because you saw an ad. So who were the Lumieres?
Yeah, the Lumiere brothers are better known as the inventors of cinema, but they were very, very well renowned. They inherited the work from the father, Auguste Lumiere, and he was renowned as a black and white film producer. So the children, the Auguste and Louise specifically, were involved in the early days when they developed cinema, but also unbeknownst to anybody, they were also the creators of color photography.
Right.
So,
and they brought it here to Burlington. So let's take a look at the factory that they built in 1901 that's off of Flynn Avenue in Burlington. Here's this incredible chimney that's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of the boiler house. It's actually, the complex is three buildings: the administrative building, the factory, and what we're seeing here is the boiler house. And it's right, this is when it used to be the appliance store. Now it's Burlington Beer Company.
Right.
And that's the main building, and now you're seeing behind the boiler house. It was a building that was made specifically along the lines of the Lumiere buildings in Lyon in France. So it's a very unique building, and this is an advertisement from the early 1900s, and it shows the factories were in Lyon and in Burlington. And it's right next to the lake, and it was totally closed off to be pitch black in there so that the film wouldn't be developed, begin to develop too early. And it was it had like a clean room, and it was refrigerated, and so it was very, very advanced design for a factory building at the time. It was the most advanced thing you could have.
Right, right. So innovative. And I want to just quickly thank John Suma for the footage of the building that is now Burlington Beer Company's tap room. So why was Burlington chosen as the site for the Lumiere factory 120 years ago?
Well, the Lumieres are kind of the story I learned in elementary school. Was the Lumieres kind of had all their factories in Lyon, and they never had them anywhere else. So this kind of challenges that story. And the reason they came here is, the taxes to sell imported film in the early 1900s were really, really high. So they wanted to get into the market, and they finally came to the decision that they would be in the US. But why Burlington is a really great question. And I think a big part of it is that there was a large population of people that spoke French. And also, Burlington was renowned for making dye works materials for wool and for cotton. And we're going to see that that was part of what this process involved. So we had the chemical know-how and the industrial know-how, but we critically had a population of people that could be trained by the French trainers and the manager that was ultimately going to come here.
And spoke French, of course. And
And yes,
very
absolutely,
important.
absolutely.
So the Lumiere plant, they sold lanterns there, they development materials, they made black and white photo plates and X-ray film, but the
Yep,
star product was color photography plates and a process called Autochrome. People thought color photographs were impossible, you've told
that's
me.
right.
So
Yeah.
what was novel about this Autochrome process?
Well, it was the first time that anybody could take a direct photograph in color. Before that, people would take a black and white photograph and then hand paint it with color. And this gave you the opportunity to just take a shot, and it was directly what you were seeing. And it relied on potato starch,
Hmm.
little teeny, like imagine the dried potato, mashed potato that you might buy at the store. If you split it into three pieces and you dye each of them different colors, they were the pixels, if you
Hmm.
will, to create the image. And it was remarkable quality, which we're going to see in a minute. But that was the key part of it. And so you needed to be able to dye that starch.
Right. So let's take a look, and
Uh-huh.
how Autochrome changed how we really see life.
Yeah.
So very early on, people were excited to, of course, take photographs of gardens.
Yep.
And
Yes, and so what this changed. This is a woman who took her garden in Long Island, and her husband took pictures of these. She was an early landscape architect, and this changed things from having to describe your layout and your design in many pages in black and white images and description, and you
right,
could just say it looks like this.
right, and here there were portraits, and then
Yeah.
beautiful portraits very
Oh,
early on, of course, of people and models like this one, or even we found one at Shelburne Farms. Look at this.
yes. Yeah, that's remarkable. And that's not a touched up picture. That is just the way it was taken.
Right, that is a color photograph. And also, this is very early 20th century. So World War I was also, or there's a Paris market that's just beautiful because it has so many colors in it.
Yeah.
This is 1914, but then there were also the soldiers, a beautiful shot of, look at those blue uniforms
Yeah.
and the Metropolitan, and this is real color photography. This is not tinted.
Correct. And it really changes the story because when I run across the conversations with people and I ask them, what do you think of World War One? I'm pretty sure people have in their head a black and white image.
Mhm.
And this is, it's very vivid. You can see how it really was in people in the trenches.
And there's even, you can see other cultures for the first time.
Hmm.
There's this photograph actually could have been taken today, in a way,
Oh, that's
possibly,
beautiful.
but it's
Yeah.
just gorgeous with all these colors. And I'm going to move us on to make sure we get to many things, but there's an article, we saw a little reference to it, Alfred Stieglitz, who was arguably, the most famous photographer of his time, wrote this about the process in 1907. Since the invention of the daguerreotype, he wrote, nothing so beautiful has been given to the world. How is Stieglitz important to the story? That is his article.
Yeah. Stieglitz was an early adopter of the film, and he said, I just don't ever want to take another black and white picture again. And by his status, to be able to convey that to his peers in photography, it was the mark of acceptance of this new technology that really
Mm.
startled people. It was really groundbreaking in a way that we just have a hard time even imagining.
Right. And amazingly, so we had the quadricentennial of Champlain coming down to the lake some 10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And in 1909, when the factory was here, they offered this wonderful show at the tricentenary with Lumiere
Yeah.
Lanterns that these women are holding. This is in Lyon, but they're the little lanterns that were like slide projectors, right?
Yeah, yeah. In those days, they called it throwing the image. But in 1909, as you're correct, for the 300th anniversary, the Lumiere factory said, "Well, what can we contribute to the celebration?" And they had these 10 hours a day projections of images from all over the United States and other towns in Vermont onto the walls of Burlington. And people were just fascinated walking around and seeing, the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone Park in downtown Burlington. It was really wild.
That must have been just an incredible experience. So, but the factory shut down after less than a decade, which does account for its relatively obscure history. But was the business not successful?
Oh
What
yeah.
happened?
No, the business was successful. The two things that happened, to say really briefly, the Jugla company in France bought into the Lumiere company. It became Jugla Lumiere. The decisions were then made differently. But key to the whole story was that the tariffs in the United States changed. I don't have time to get into all the
So it was
details,
economic.
but it was economically cheaper to go back to France and export the material.
Great. Well, you can find out more about in the Vermont History Journal where this article is. It's available for purchase or, of course, at your local library. So quickly, what's next for your adventure?
Well, we're hoping to have a developing relationship with the Lumiere Institute in Lyon. There's a big museum there, and they celebrate French contribution to cinema and to Autochrome. So obviously, that relationship is going to be very key,
Great.
and we're just having a beginning conversations with them.
Love this story. Ugo, thank you so much for being with us and uncovering this precious piece of history of Burlington.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.